Well, what a season finale that was. We finally got the conclusion of the 7-hour flight from Dubai to London and the hijacking that was taking place. With Amanda taking over the plane in the final part of the previous episode, it left so many questions as we entered this finale, but the answer to the main one was the hijackers didn't have a clue who she was, and the plane was in a more vulnerable state. So did they land the plane safely? Did Edgar and John get away with it? And did Kai survive? Well, fasten your seatbelts as there will be turbulence as I present to you Hijack Episode 7 Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Oh, and if you enjoy the video, then feel free to hit subscribe. Thanks. The ending. This whole episode was about the final hour of the journey that the plane was doing to Heathrow. However, its destination wasn't actually going to be Heathrow. We saw that following on from the previous episode, the lady who we found out was called Amanda took over the plane because her daughter was being held hostage by the OCG. Because she had skills in being a pilot due to being in the Navy, she was targeted for that reason. She was flying the plane towards central London because the closer it got to the city, the higher the chances it meant that there was going to be a crash, which ultimately meant that the stock price of Kingdom Airways would fall lower and lower. This was important because it turned out that that was the main reason as to why the hijacking originally took place. We initially thought that it was to get Edgar and John out of jail, but despite that being a small reason, the main reason was because they made a deal that essentially bet on the stock price crashing down, which is something that they were successful in doing, and they made a ton of money in doing so. This deal was carried out for them by one of the first passengers that we saw in episode 1, when he was running late to the plane, which adds more weight to the reason as to why he was so panicked. Because if he didn't make it onto the plane, then his family would have been killed, as the hijacking wouldn't have even taken place at all. Amanda was waiting for a text message from Edgar to confirm that it was time for her to land the plane, because the stock price had dropped to a level that was extremely low and he was ready to cash out. But Edgar just wasn't messaging. His eyes were too big and was holding out more and more, just wanting to rinse it for as much as possible, despite having earned loads already. With Edgar being the way that he was, we saw John getting frustrated and he ultimately killed Edgar, something which was originally part of his plan, as he said to his companion, "We're going to have to do this sooner," meaning that it was already on the cards. This meant that Amanda was never going to get the text message to land the plane, as there was now nobody to send it. With Amanda flying over the plane with no instructions on whether to land it and no status update on whether or not her daughter was safe, we saw the crew and passengers get increasingly frustrated as they didn't know what was happening to them. By this point, as none of the hijackers knew who Amanda was, the passengers began retaking the plane and tying up the hijackers, as they found out that none of their weapons were real other than the one that Sam had. This was where we saw Sam's skills of negotiating with people and getting them to change their minds coming into effect. With them having Amanda's phone and finding out about her daughter, he used her as a way of getting inside of her mind and allowing him inside of the cockpit so that they could land the plane, which she did eventually agree to do. The tension was built prior to this due to the fact that they knew nothing about Amanda, and there were 2 RAF jets that were alongside the plane ready to shoot it down above open water to avoid it crashing into the city, but they were eventually told to stand down. With Amanda having changed her mind, we saw that when they decided to come to the decision to land it, the plane had run out of fuel and they couldn't go any further. They needed to just glide the plane down to a landing area in Northolt, a landing area that wasn't long enough and still posed risks. With everybody phoning their family and loved ones, it was positioned that it could have genuinely gone either way, but the plane did land successfully, albeit whilst engulfed in flames, but they managed to make it out safely and the hijackers were all apprehended. Amanda even had a promise from the Home Secretary that she wouldn't be arrested for what she'd done to the pilot. After the tension was over, we saw an added extra where Stuart was still on board the plane, and he locked Sam in there where they had one final face-off against each other, just like how this whole thing started. And whilst it was tense, I did kind of feel as though it was just a bit unnecessary, especially with the cheesy line at the end. It's something that Arnie would have said in a movie in the 80s, but I guess it worked. And then the show finished. No need for a follow-up afterwards, just life continued on for the characters. It was best summed up by air traffic control on the ground in the UK, where Alice went to pick up her son from school and the boss said to everybody, "Great work, but we've got a lot more to do," showing that their life and day continued on as it was just part of their day for them. Outside of this main arm of the story, there was the section that had Kai being held hostage by the 2 cleaners. Upon reflection, I don't actually feel as though this was needed. It didn't really add anything, nor did it provide suspense or tension. When Kai walked out of the room, it felt like the most unrealistic thing he could have possibly done at that moment, especially considering he knew the dangers that were present. And of course, he got caught and held hostage. I would say though, the smooth takedown by Daniel and the team when they opened the door and evacuated the building was good to watch, as it was just so smooth. Kai's clue about riding his bike home was also a smart move, because obviously he was on an exercise bike at home in episode 1, so it subtly informed Daniel that he was in danger, but he ultimately managed to survive, and Daniel and Kai had a bond that looked as though it had been strengthened. Overall review. I actually really enjoyed this season, and more specifically the finale of the show. It was the most tense episode that we had throughout the entirety of it, and I feel as though it was good to have it during the season finale. I don't know if it was just me, but there was something that was quite emotional about when the plane entered its descent and landed. I still didn't know if they were going to survive, and it felt like the show could have made the plane get engulfed in flames and killed everybody off. So the stakes were still so high. That paired with the reactions of everybody and the score that was behind it gave it something that just evoked emotions from me, and I imagine many other viewers out there as well. This was the episode where I didn't really want it to finish, because that feeling of fear and tension that I had when watching it was something that I didn't really want to stop. Seeing the hijackers get overpowered by the passengers on the plane was a moment that was also great to witness, as we saw them rendered powerless, but the sense of accomplishment was short-lived due to the wider threat, so it definitely provided conflicted emotions. I thought Idris Elba was great in this final episode, and it summed up the entirety of his performances throughout the season. Solid. There was never a moment where his performance was put into question, or felt like it wasn't quite there. It was just your standard Idris Elba doing Idris Elba things. Neil Maskall is also a standout for me in this show as well. I think he's a great actor and deserves to be in more high-profile shows and movies. One thing I would say though is that the final face-off with Sam and Stuart right at the end was a little bit pointless. I understand why it was done, to give them one final moment together, seeing as though they spent a lot of time just one-on-one. But it did just feel a little shoehorned in. Overall, I would say that I thought this was a good show. It's a show that allows you to feel things and constantly has you guessing what's going to happen next. It peaked at the right time, the penultimate episode and the season finale, exactly when you want a show to peak. I've recommended this show to a few people that I know, and I feel that's probably how it's going to get its viewers, from people just telling people that they know about how good it is. With it being the finale, I guess that's it. It doesn't seem like a season 2 is going to happen, so for a limited series, I think it was decent. So, there you have it, Hijack episode 7 ending explained. I just want to say a massive thanks for those that came back every week for the breakdowns on the channel for the show. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more breakdowns on future shows. What did you think of this finale? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.